Foreclosure inevitable, Your Honor, the lawyer smirked, slamming the deed down. Jake's gut clenched. Generations lost. How could he fight AgriCorp's lies with empty pockets? Jake gripped the smooth, worn wood of the defendant's table, his knuckles white. The courtroom air felt thick, suffocating, smelling faintly of floor polish and desperation. He could feel the eyes on him, his neighbors from Harmony Creek, pitying glances. Old man Hemlock, shaking his head slowly. Even Judge Miller seemed resigned, peering over his spectacles at the stack of documents presented by AgriCorp's lawyer, Mr. Thorne. Thorne. Slicked back hair, suit worth more than Jake's entire fall harvest. He moved with the predatory grace of a circling hawk, confident, assured. Why wouldn't he be? AgriCorp had unlimited resources, lawyers on retainer, surveyors who could apparently redraw history to suit their needs. And Jake? Jake had grit, a stubborn farmer's pride, and a mountain of debt inherited along with the sprawling acres of Willow Creek Farm. The land wasn't just dirt and crops to Jake. It was his grandfather's sweat, his father's legacy, the only home he'd ever known. It was the curve of the creek where he caught his first fish, the sturdy old oak his dad taught him to climb, the rich dark soil that yielded life year after year. Losing it felt like losing a limb, or worse, his soul. AgriCorp claimed a section of his western pasture, nearly 50 acres bordering the old county road, belonged to them based on an obscure clause in a century-old deed transfer involving the railroad expansion that never fully materialized. They argued the land reverted to the adjacent parcel, which AgriCorp had quietly bought up years ago from an absentee landlord. 50 acres. It sounded small to city folk, perhaps, but for Jake, it was prime grazing land. It held the main access route for his heavier equipment. Losing it would cripple the farm's viability, forcing a sale, which was exactly what AgriCorp wanted. They'd been circling Willow Creek for years, wanting the water rights, the potential for development closer to the highway. Jake knew it. Everyone knew it. But proving their predatory intent was different from fighting their legal maneuvers. Thorne presented maps, surveys, expert testimonies from men Jake had never seen before, men who spoke of boundary lines and historical easements with absolute certainty, contradicting the worn, hand-drawn map Jake's grandfather had tacked inside the barn door decades ago. Jake's own lawyer, young Sarah Jenkins, fresh out of law school and working pro bono out of principle, fought valiantly. She questioned the chain of title, highlighted inconsistencies in the old records. But Thorne always had an answer. Another document, another expert witness to muddy the waters, to cast doubt. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Jake felt helpless. Drowning in legal complexities he barely understood. His savings were gone. The stress was a constant weight, making sleep impossible, food tasteless. He saw the worry in his wife Emily's. Eyes tried to shield their 2 young kids from the tension tightening around their small farmhouse like a noose. During breaks in the proceedings, Jake would step outside the stifling courthouse, needing air. He'd often see him then, the man the town just called Silas. He drifted around Harmony Creek like a piece of tumbleweed. Older fellow, ragged coat. Regardless of the weather, beard tangled and gray, eyes that seemed to hold the sorrow of the world but missed nothing. Silas rarely spoke. Accepted offered food with a quiet nod. Sometimes swept the sidewalk outside the general store for a few dollars Mrs. Gable might spare him. Jake, despite his own troubles, sometimes bought the man a coffee on cold mornings or passed him leftovers Emily packed. Small gestures. He felt a pang of guilt seeing Silas, thinking how close his own family might be to that edge if AgriCorp won. Silas often sat on the low stone wall bordering the courthouse lawn, watching people come and go with detached curiosity. Jake noticed Silas seemed particularly focused when Thorne and his AgriCorp associates strode past, their expensive shoes clicking on the pavement. Silas's gaze would linger, unreadable. Just another lost soul, Jake thought, pushed to the margins. He had his own battle to fight. Back in the courtroom, the final days of the trial felt like a slow-motion collapse. Thorne presented AgriCorp's final devastating piece of evidence. The midpoint twist arrived not with a bang, but with the crisp unfolding of a large, seemingly pristine survey map. "Your Honor," Thorne announced smoothly, "this map, recently uncovered in the county archives during unrelated research, definitively clarifies the boundary in question. Commissioned in 1958 by the previous owner of the adjacent parcel, it clearly shows the disputed 50 acres as belonging to that property, predating any subsequent claims by the defendant's family. The map looked official, detailed, signed and sealed by a surveyor Jake had never heard of. Sarah Jenkins objected fiercely, questioning its sudden appearance, its convenient timing. But the map was entered into evidence. The weight of it settled over the courtroom, heavy and final. Jake felt the last dregs of hope drain away. That map contradicted everything his family had believed for generations. How could they fight something that looked so definitive, so official? Where had it come from? He spent a frantic weekend scouring his grandfather's old lockbox, searching for anything, any letter, any note that might refute the 1958 map. He found mentions of property lines, arguments with neighbors long dead, but nothing concrete about that specific survey. Only a cryptic note tucked inside an old ledger. "Boundary stone by the creek marks the true line. Silas knows the secret." Silas? Which Silas? Not the homeless man, surely. It had to be an old family name, someone long gone. The note felt like another dead end, a cruel tease. He visited the boundary stone mentioned, a large, moss-covered boulder near Willow Creek, where his pasture met the disputed land. It looked like just a rock, solid, immovable, ancient. No secrets visible there. Just memories of skipping stones with his dad. Defeated, he returned for the final court session. Closing arguments began. Sarah did her best, her voice passionate, but her evidence thin against AgriCorp's mountain of documentation and the damning 1958 map. Thorne's closing was smug, concise. He painted Jake as ignorant, clinging to outdated notions, fighting against inevitable progress. He practically patted AgriCorp on the back for reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Judge Miller listened impassively, occasionally making notes. Jake could see the decision forming behind his neutral expression. It was over. He braced himself. Emily squeezed his hand under the table, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. Then, something unexpected happened. A shuffle from the back benches, a figure rising slowly, deliberately. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. It was Silas, the homeless man. He stood there, ragged coat and all, his gaze fixed on Judge Miller. "Your Honor," Silas said, his voice surprisingly clear and steady, cutting through the stunned silence. "I have testimony regarding that 1958 map and the boundary stone." Chaos erupted. Thorne leaped to his feet, objecting loudly. "Irrelevant. This man is not on the witness list. He's a vagrant." Judge Miller banged his gavel sharply. "Order! Order!" He peered at Silas over his glasses, intrigued despite himself. "You claim to have relevant information about Exhibit 4B, the 1958 survey map, and the boundary marker." "I do, Your Honor," Silas affirmed, his voice gaining strength. "Direct knowledge." Thorne sputtered. "This is highly irregular. He has no standing." But the judge, perhaps sensing the desperation in Jake's corner, perhaps intrigued by the specificity of Silas's claim, linking the map and the stone Jake's lawyer had briefly mentioned from the cryptic note, made a decision. "Approach the bench. Mr. Silas Mercer, Your Honor," Silas said, walking slowly forward, ignoring the hostile glares from the AgriCorp table and the astonished looks from Jake and Sarah. Thorne looked apoplectic, but the judge waved him down. Silas was sworn in. Sarah quickly conferred with Jake, both bewildered but clinging to this unexpected, impossible lifeline. Silas stood at the witness stand. He looked small against the imposing backdrop of the court, yet possessed a quiet dignity Jake hadn't noticed before. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Miller began, "you stated you have knowledge pertinent to this case?" "Yes, sir," Silas replied. "I know that 1958 map presented by Agricorp is a forgery, and I know what the boundary stone by the creek really holds." Thorne objected again. "Speculation, hearsay." "Overruled for now. Explain yourself, Mr. Mercer," the judge instructed, leaning forward. Silas took a deep breath. "My full name is Silas Mercer III. My grandfather, Silas Mercer I, was the county surveyor here for nearly 40 years, starting back in the 1920s. He was meticulous, honest. He surveyed this entire area, including the original boundaries of the Willow Creek farm, when Jake's great-grandfather, Thomas, first bought it clear." Jake stared, dumbfounded. "Silas Mercer III, grandson of the county surveyor?" "My grandfather was friends with Thomas," Silas continued. "Deeply respected him. When the railroad tried pulling fast ones back then, Thomas stood his ground. There was an agreement made, a gentleman's agreement regarding that western pasture boundary, ensuring it stayed with the farm, never to be separated. It wasn't fully documented in the convoluted deeds of the time to avoid further legal challenges from the railroad lawyers. Instead, my grandfather and Thomas devised a way to mark it permanently." He paused, looking directly at Jake. "The boundary, stone, Jake. It's not just a rock. There's a false front on the creek-facing side. Behind it, sealed against the weather, is a bronze plaque. My grandfather cast it himself. It details the exact boundary line agreed upon by Thomas and the original owner of the adjacent parcel, witnessed and surveyed by Silas Mercer I. It confirms the 50 acres belong to Willow Creek Farm." The courtroom was utterly silent. Jake felt dizzy. The cryptic note wasn't about this Silas knowing, but about the stone itself holding the secret placed there by the original Silas. "And the 1958 map?" Judge Miller prompted. Silas's expression hardened. "A known forgery technique, Your Honor. My grandfather documented attempts by certain unscrupulous developers even back then to create fake historical surveys. The signature on that map isn't the surveyor listed. It mimics his style but lacks key identifiers my grandfather taught me to spot. More importantly, I personally worked as an apprentice surveyor in the county records office in the early 70s. I saw preliminary drafts of that exact forgery being created. It was commissioned not in 1958, but around 1974, by intermediaries working for a shell company that, years later, quietly became part of Agricorp. They were planning even then to grab that land, creating false provenance." He provided specific details. Names of the intermediaries he remembered seeing. The type of paper used, inconsistent with genuine 1958 documents. The location in the archives where the forgery was likely planted. His testimony was clear, detailed, devastatingly precise. Thorne was pale, speechless for once. Sarah quickly requested a court recess to examine the boundary stone. Judge Miller agreed immediately. The entire court, judge, lawyers, Jake, Emily, even some curious townsfolk and a fuming Thorne, trooped out to Willow Creek Farm. Following Silas's direction, Jake located the hidden seam on the boulder. With some effort, they pried loose a section of rock. And there it was, a dark, rectangular bronze plaque, green with age, but perfectly preserved. Engraved lettering clearly detailed the original boundary agreement, confirming the 50 acres belonged unequivocally to Willow Creek Farm, signed by Thomas Bellwether, the adjacent owner, and Silas Mercer, county surveyor, dated 1928. Agricorp's case crumbled instantly. Back in court, Judge Miller ruled decisively in Jake's favor, his judgment laced with stern warnings about the presentation of potentially fraudulent documents. Thorne and his team gathered their papers in humiliated silence, facing possible investigation for perjury and fraud. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the now secure fields of Willow Creek Farm, Jake found Silas sitting quietly on his porch swing, nursing a glass of lemonade Emily had brought him. "Silas? Mr. Mercer? I don't know how to thank you," Jake stammered, overwhelmed with gratitude. Silas offered a small, weary smile. "No thanks needed, son. Keeping promises. That's all." He looked out over the land, his gaze distant. "My family. We hit hard times back during the Depression. Lost our place. Thomas, your great-grandfather, he took us in. Gave my father work here on this farm. Let us stay in the old tenant cottage through the worst winter. Never asked for anything in return. Said neighbors look out for each other." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "My father never forgot that kindness. Made me promise I'd always keep an eye on this place, on the bellwether land, make sure its truth wasn't forgotten. After my own life took some wrong turns," he gestured vaguely at his own worn appearance, "watching over this place, honoring that promise, it was one thing I could still do right. Seeing Agricorp trying to steal it, using lies my grandfather fought against, I couldn't stay silent. The hidden truth wasn't just the plaque, or the forged map, or even Silas's identity. It was the quiet, enduring power of a single act of kindness performed generations ago, a debt of honor patiently held by a man the world dismissed, waiting for the moment to step out of the shadows and defend the legacy of the family who had once sheltered his own. It was the unseen connection, the forgotten history, that ultimately saved the farm. What unseen debts of kindness echo through generations, waiting for the perfect moment to alter our fate? Drop your theory in the comments and subscribe for more stories where the past delivers unexpected justice.